Good afternoon. This is Monday, April 14th, 4 o'clock at the 41st Annual CALLERLAB Convention here in Sparks, Nevada. And this is the I Don't Understand session. We have a group of people here who are going to meet to discuss the video we just saw, which is the F.A.T. city video, which stands for Frustration, Anxiety, and Tension. And it's a video that was produced a few years back. Set up and described a learning disabled child's experience in the classroom. And through the facilitator of that video, he had the parents, the teachers, and the students all experience what it was like to be learning disabled through various techniques. We all watched this video, and we're looking at this video both as an eye-opening experience about our own children and our own learning and experiences we might have had with people who are learning disabled, and also how we might take some of the ideas and thoughts that came out of this video and how we can use them in teaching our square dance classes. So with that as an opener, I would like to open the discussion up to what people thought about this video. And when you do talk, we ask that you put take the microphone and state your name and the city where you're from, or city, state, country. Thank you.
I'm Deborah Carroll Jones from Arlington, Texas. My father learned to square dance, started taking square dance classes when he was 64. And at that age, most adults are out of the habit of learning. Kids are in the habit of learning. But the more we get, we're in our job for a while, we know what we're doing. We're really not too much in the habit of learning. Well, Daddy was just, I love you, Daddy, but he was not the brightest bulb in the string in class. So every week when he lived about 60 miles away, he would go to class on Sundays, and Mondays I would call him and ask him how it went. And he shared several experiences with me, his experience as a learner, which helped me enormously as an instructor. And the first one that he shared with me was that he had had a bad night. He said, I couldn't understand anything the guy was saying. He said, I couldn't remember anything. I was never where I was supposed to be. I was always facing the wrong way. My partner was never there. It was awful. And as he's describing how the evening went on, I'm kind of snickering on the phone, and he got a little bit upset and said, what are you laughing at? I said, well, Daddy, that's just normal in the process. And he said something I have never forgotten. He said, well, if it's so normal, how come they didn't tell us that? Because what did he think? He was the only one who didn't get it, right? So I've made it a point in my instruction from the first night to say you will have nights when things are just going to be popping like everything. You're going to be exactly where you belong and everything's going to be wonderful. And then you're going to have another night a week or two later where all of a sudden I'm speaking Greek and you're never facing the right way. It's just one of those nights. Don't worry about it. It's normal. And I actually had a student come in a week ago and say, you know those nights you were talking about at the beginning? I think I'm having one of those tonight. And she knew enough about it then to feel comfortable with it and laugh about it. So she was not feeling as though she was the only one who didn't get it. Because if somebody feels like that, we don't have children that have to come to school every day. We have adults that are coming in and they don't have to come back. And if they're made to feel stupid or foolish, they're not going to come back. So that was one lesson I really learned from my father that helped me. And another one was when I was sharing with him, I didn't understand why dancers could not recover. If you have an experience where you get lost, how come you can't recover? How come you can't make a line without milling around and voting on who screwed it up and, whatever it is, just make a line. And I said, I don't understand why they can't do that. And Daddy said, let me describe for you what it feels like. Oh, okay. And he said, it's like being jerked underwater. He said, you can see colors. You can sort of see shapes. You hear noise, but it doesn't mean anything. Because if you picture how things are when you're underwater with your eyes open, I could then understand as an instructor the frustration and the complete disorientation of dancers getting lost in the square. and it gave me an empathy that I did not have before. So it helped me tremendously. And those are the two things that I wanted to share with everybody about how learning about being privileged to see someone's learning adventure made me a better instructor.
Does anybody else want to add something into that? Anything from the video today? One of the things I got, this is the third time I've seen this video, and at least the third time, maybe fourth. And each time I watch it, I get something new out of it. It's got a lot of information in a short amount of time. The biggest thing that I took out of that video was the modalities of teaching. Up until I saw that video, I had one modality of teaching. That was simply words. I'd give you the words, do the action. You either got it or you didn't. And now I get from this the different modalities and different ways that I can express to dancers how to do something. And the fact they don't catch on right away doesn't necessarily mean that they're never going to get it. There might be a different way that they need to have that information communicated to them. I now use 3 modalities of teaching. I use words. I give them the words of what to do. I much more often now, especially in the last 2 years, use demonstrations, even as part of my regular classes, because it just accelerates that learning process. I can explain past the ocean and work on it for a half hour, 45 minutes before they might get it smooth, or I can show it to them in 5 minutes and they'll get it smooth in 5 minutes. And so the modality of demonstration with words and the whole thing going on, what everybody's getting, it clicks with the words and the demonstration. The third modality that I use is the written word, and getting the written word, getting the names up there, because people say, that call, the one where you circulate once and a half, and the sixth trade, and the boys move up, and you form a line. That call, I'm talking about, right? Oh, you mean coordinate? Yeah, so, they can remember all the words, they can remember how to do the call. They couldn't remember the name of the call, right? So half the battle is getting them to remember the name of the call, maybe some definition about the call. So you get the visual of the words, you have the visual of the demonstration, and of course the auditory for the words. Those are the 3 things I got out of this video, is how to use different modalities. It has really helped my teaching with my classes at all levels, even up through advanced. So
Okay, Roy Gata, New Jersey, and I'm a round dance leader, but then again I'm married to the other side for almost 40 years, and I actually own a copy of this video. After the first time I saw Clark present it, I immediately bought it, and I presented it once at Round the Lab. But every time I see it, it makes me realize, oh crap, what have I done to some of the people who have come to me to learn something. And like Eric, I added to what I taught. I always did round dancing. You always do words and you always do demo. That's just the way it's done. But then I added the written, and then recently, as things have become available, I've added the video reinforcement tools, because a lot of my people want to be able to go home and digest what has happened. And so I make sure I own most of the video tools available, and I show them all of them and where they can get them and what they cost. And then the other thing that hit home to me is I started thinking about how I teach. And once I saw this video, I really started looking at how I teach, and there was a couple of things, and one of them that I believe it's briefly talked about, but really not a whole lot, that is a big problem, and I see it with a lot of callers, and myself as a cuer, is body language. And what we do to some of our people as far as reinforcing their frustrations. And I was guilty of it just last week, and as soon as it happened, I went, oh no. A particular question was asked that's been being asked for, like, it seems since the beginning of this class 3 years ago. And they said, could you review? And I immediately, my shoulders slumped. I picked them back up, but I know that the dancers, they'll see it in a heartbeat. And I watched so many callers a lot of times, especially in the classes, and they'll get questions, and you can see the body language like, oh, you mean you still don't understand that? And but I just can't emphasize. I encourage people to buy this video, and I watch it at least once a year, just to make sure I remember to not do the things that I do that reinforces their frustration and anxiety. So that's what I get out of it.
Don Beck from Massachusetts. Slightly off the subject, but what Eric mentioned, that one of the things you learned is that you dancers know that circulate once and a half, but can't remember what it's called. It's not their job. I had one good friend, we finally talked into going to lessons once, and I checked in with her the next day and said, what did you learn? And she said, well, I can't remember what it's called. It was, the guys stay there and the ladies go across with the right hand, and then the guy turns them until they're facing back in. And I said, you mean a lady's chain? And she said, yeah. And I realized as dancers, their job is to hear the call and respond to it physically. As callers, our job is to think of where we want the person to go and then pull up the name and present it. Now, I saw this in other parts of my life, and it sort of drove the point home even further. One of the many phases I've gone through is ham radio, and I had to learn Morse code. And receiving Morse code, hearing the dits and das, and putting them on paper is one activity. Saying what I want to do and pushing the key till that dits and das go out is another activity. And I got to receiving and writing down to the point where I couldn't write fast enough. Well, one of the other things independent from that happened in my life is I was lucky enough to learn typing in high school. Didn't know back then how useful it would be now with keyboarding, but and so people that really learn Morse code fast, they type, and I could type faster than I could write. So I tried to receive Morse code in my ear and put it into my fingers to type. And I had to go way back and start over again. A friend of mine, he learned in the Navy. You hear the sounds, you move the fingers. He had no idea what he was typing, but he was receiving those dits and das and putting them on paper quickly. So it's a one-way learning street, whichever thing you're doing. And so if a dancer knows the action but can't bring the name up, don't fault the dancer on that. The dancer's job is to hear the name and move into the action.
Hi, I'm Julie from Germany. I saw something in the video what I think is very, very important. It's accentuate the positive. I hope I said that right. We have dancers who are not used to learn anymore. I had a lady in my last class, and she said she get nightmares before class time because she's afraid she does something wrong. And I felt so bad, and I said, don't worry. This is not happening overnight. And I tried since then to make sure every time she does the movement right, and 2 out of 3 times it doesn't happen. But when it happens, I say, you did right. Don't get confused. You were right. Stay right where you are. You did good. And I thought often enough she will break up. She will say, forget it. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm tired of that. But she's coming every night. And she's so proud that she has a night where I say several times, you did good. And I think it's very important that we don't pick on our dancers on, turn around, you do wrong. No. We need to say, you were right. Good done. Well done.
Expound on Julie's a little. Hi, Roy Gott again, and I think Sharon will back me up on this one. But sometimes when we're teaching, and we'll see, you don't like to single people out, so you'll see, all right, I saw a few people did this, whatever, and there's always that one couple or person that, as Julie said, they'll always think it's them. They could be not have struggled or whatever, they say, oh, I guess I did it wrong. So I've taken to the point to very specific couples where, all right, there were like 3 or 4 of you on this, whatever, strolling vine. Here's what happened. You guys were fine, so don't watch here because I don't want to mess up. You were right. And especially when they did do something right. And every single week, I will single out someone who did something right, but I will never single out a single person who did something wrong. Sometimes I'll say, all of you were differently correct. Or there was 7 different variations of that figure that time, okay, and there's 7 couples. But I will single people out to praise them, but I don't single them out to, and there were times I would say, let me show you what you did wrong. Well, I realized I just singled that person out, trying to be helpful. So, and after watching this video the first time, it was okay, don't single them out to show them what they did wrong, single them out to show them what they, or praise them for what they did right.
Dave Harry, Seattle, Washington area. If you want to become a strong instructor and learn more about what it takes to be an instructor, go take a class in some subject that you know nothing about, preferably a class that you have to think in and you have to move. And you'll learn through frustration what it's like to be a student, and you'll also learn the downfalls of the instructor that's teaching the class and erase those downfalls from your teaching skills. And the other thing you can do is go teach in the public schools, because then you're teaching over and over and over again, and you're honing your skills, and you're honing those terms that you need, or those words that you need to get that student or all of those students through a class, and you're doing it over and over and over and over again all day long.
Deborah again. One of the things that after a while, after we get busy teaching square dancing, is we don't get the opportunity, or round dancing, to go out and hear how other people teach, because our time is kind of sucked up. We're teaching our own classes. And there was a caller in the Southern California area when I lived there, and he and I had made an agreement to follow the exact same teaching order, so that if someone missed my class, they could go to his, and vice versa. Well, we spent many hours devising this order that we were going to use for the two of us, and we decided to record ourselves teaching the class, and this was in the days of cassettes, so this went back a little ways. We would record our teaching and mail it to each other, and it gave me the opportunity to hear somebody else teach and to get some great ideas that I would not have been privy to because I was doing my own thing. And I think we can get sort of stale, and it helps to hear how somebody else is doing their instruction. So I just offer that as a suggestion. If you know somebody that could make a record, I know we can do recordings off the laptops now, that we could exchange the files and see how somebody else is teaching a particular call.
Clark Baker, Belmont, Mass. So I watched this earlier and took some notes, and I was trying to think of how does this relate to our calling activity? We've hit on a few of the things. One is I was taught in caller school to don't pick on dancers, don't single someone out. I think they said anxiety affects performance. Are our learners in our classes anxious? How do we know, and how do we reduce that anxiety? I mean, I think your personality can go a long way and so forth, but I do think that when the wife drags the husband by the heels into the first class, he's pretty nervous. I mean, he might become the more enthusiastic partner after a while, but people who come to our classes, they're risk takers. They took a risk. They're coming to the class. You may only get one shot with them, and we have to make sure that they have fun, that we reduce as much of their anxiety, that we don't pick on them, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we can control hugely. Remember, the pace of the class seems too fast for the LD learners. I think we can be careful in our teaching and go a little slower, possibly using shorter phrases, words, saying things in several different ways, teaching with maybe by demonstration and by words. When we're calling, you can always give that little bit of extra time. But at some point, our activity is you hear this, you respond in this amount of time. And it can't take forever to do that. The section that talked about, and I always forget their terms, activities like driving and talking and all that, which associative, the ones we can do easily, the associative ones, I think that when we first learn square dancing, it's a cognitive exercise, right? We learn to call, and the caller says it, and we're kind of applying the little parts. I have to do this and that and turn here. And we're trying to get it into so-called muscle memory. We're trying to make it become an associative task. Different people probably go down that trail at a different rate. And we have to do the repetition. We have to move them to different positions and try again. We have to let it go for a bit and then reteach it next week and make sure that they remember it next week. There's a whole section on teaching, which I did for Don, which is on my website, which talks about making sure that the very first time they do it right, so they don't fall back on some initial wrong way you did it. So being a good teacher certainly has to help. Let me see if I had one more thing here. All this stuff, I clearly, in the other stuff I do, I work in definitions a lot. And people often complain about the definitions. They're too hard, they're obscure. I don't learn by definition. I don't think many people learn to square dance by picking up a set of definitions, even if they were ones intended for helping people learn and read it and then go, oh, I've got it. I know a lot of the challenge dancers end up doing it, but that's not how you learn mainstream dancing. It's not how you learn plus. I think a few people learn that way. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 10 or 20% are good. And those dancers can reinforce what they learn dancing by going home and rereading definitions that are available online. But I think that's one reason why the definitions don't work so well, or people keep finding out that they're like, I read this and it reads like gobbledygook to me. That's not their learning style. They're going to learn things differently, either by seeing it, maybe by hearing it. I will stop there for a little bit.
I think we're tying him up in a knot. All right. We untangled Eric. This is Dottie Welch from Nova Scotia, Canada. Okay, so I took lots of notes. I'd hoped to be able to see this ahead of time, and it didn't work. So this is my first time to actually see it. However, I have a background as a teacher and have spent a fair amount of time learning about learning styles and know something about dealing with disabilities, although not probably as much as Julie does, because she's obviously specialized in it. But just kind of starting from the beginning and my notes, and okay, so very first thing you might notice, I watched that and I took 5 pages of notes. What does that tell you about me?
You learn by reading.
I'm a visual learner. I am a visual learner. And I know that I have to take that into consideration when I'm dealing with someone who is not a visual learner. For me, the way to learn is to see it, see the diagrams, study the diagrams, look at them, and yes, I can visualize it. I taught mathematics, so I have a good geometrical visualization mind. Now, I know that about myself, but I have to take into consideration that the people that I'm teaching do not necessarily think that way. I have to reach into their way of learning, make myself reach into their way of learning so that I can speak to them in terms that they will understand or demonstrate to them in a way that they will understand. And one thing that they really didn't address there, because I'm not sure that 30 years ago there was so much awareness of it, they didn't really talk about the kinesthetic learner and how the kinds of things one does in a typical classroom do not cater to the kinesthetic learner's needs. And likewise, some of the things that we do as square dance callers do not cater to the kinesthetic learner's needs. In particular, from watching kinesthetic learners and their struggles with learning, I have realized how very important it is that you don't take a call and in your very first introduction of it, teach it with them facing the head walls and immediately teach it with them facing the side walls, and then perhaps it's a call that you can do with the heads do it and the sides do it, or you can do it from facing lines, or you can do it from 8-chain through, and you think, well, I mean, these are all nice applications of this same call, so I should introduce them to all those things. Well, for the kinesthetic learner, you have put them on overload. Way big overload. They need to experience successfully facing one wall in one position. Then, separately, they need to experience facing the other wall. And then they have to see it from a different formation, separately. They have to achieve one thing before they go on to learn another. All right, you may say the pace of the class is too fast. Well, that's one of the aspects of being too fast, that you're giving them all these different applications of a given call much too quickly because they haven't had time to get into their muscle memory, even one of them, before you've given them 4, say, or more. Whatever. So that was right off at the beginning. I immediately thought about this anxiety issue. I happen to have a dancer right now who is the epitome of instant anxiety the minute the slightest thing indicates that she's done something wrong. She just goes into panic mode and then she can't do anything. So, but I have become very aware of that tendency of hers to do that. So I really make an effort to avoid anything that I might say that is going to cause her panic, and also to try to keep encouraging her that she's in the right place. If somebody else is wrong, she'll instantly think it's her. It has to be her. So I'm kind of bend over backwards to give her that extra encouragement that you're okay, this is okay, and when she's not panicky, she's a pretty good dancer. She really is. Reading comprehension. Okay, so you have visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners in your class. What do they want? What different needs do they have? When do they want to receive written material? Well, I can tell you that the visual learner is extremely frustrated when somebody says, well, I have notes and I'll give them to you later and I'm going to talk about this first. Well, that means I have to take all the notes myself because I don't have any chance to see what they've already written before I want to write it down. Will it hurt the auditory learner if they receive it earlier than they want it? Well, not really, because they can just throw it on the floor until they're ready for it. But it will hurt the visual learner not to have it when they need it. Perceived behavior. Let's see, what was I thinking about there? Oh, where he said something about misperceiving the stimulus. Well, if we aren't careful about how we describe something, and somebody gets a misconception, then they are experiencing exactly what one of these learning disability people would be experiencing, because they perceive that you want them to do something. Whatever your words, whatever picture your words gave them wasn't correct, and they're going to be, why did you go that way? Well, they heard left when you said right, or they heard women when you said men, or they heard ends when you said centers, or they missed something, or maybe your description just wasn't very clear to begin with.
You said join hands and they did this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're going to teach something. I know I've said this many times, and they made this point. When they can't do something, they definitely don't want to hear the words, it's easy.
Yeah.
And you have to be really careful about using that term. I'm going to teach something that's easy, even if it's before anybody started doing anything. If you say that and then somebody starts having trouble, what are they thinking? I'm stupid, because they said it was easy. Let me see. What else did I? Certainly the cognitive task issue, very important thing about how we process, start off having to be cognitive and then gradually work to something that I think is what he means as associative, although I'm not really familiar with that term, so I'm not quite sure how he was defining that. But certainly you get into a chunking process where it's more obvious. What else did I pick out? I think those are the most obvious ones that came to me in the process, so I'll pass it back.
I want to add something into what she said about it's easy. When you say the words it's easy, and of course it might not be easy to someone else. I have a psychologist in one of my groups, and when I would teach a call, and it's my advanced group, and I would teach a call that was one of the more involved calls, challenging calls, like a motivator or a chain reaction, I used to say, okay, this call is going to take a few minutes to teach because it's a hard call. He would come up to me in the break and say, don't ever tell them it's a hard call, because immediately they're going to get in their head, this is a hard call. It's going to be this whole roadblock they've got to get through. Anxiety. So it's the anxiety, it's a hard call, they got to get through that. And even though, in fact, it is a more challenging call for a lot of people to do, I shouldn't say that. So I got the both sides, which is don't say it's easy because somebody might not find it easy, and don't say it's hard because that's going to predispose them to it being a hard call and make it harder for them to learn. So it's best I not say anything about the call. I just teach the call.
Gives no guidance.
But it doesn't hurt to say after the fact, when they've been kind of struggling with something, that was tough and you did well.
I'm not going to identify myself this time because this is more personal comments than I care to share with the world. It's not related to square dancing, but I have learning disabilities. I first knew about them when I was in the 3rd grade. That was back before we had teachers that knew about it. And I've been working at trying to overcome them from the inside instead of the outside for many years. And I'm learning a few I'm learning a little how to do that now. You work around it. But boy, did some of this stuff really relate to the way I felt. I think I was fortunate enough to have other strengths to help me work around it and still succeed in a reasonable way. I now have a teenager. Hopefully he won't listen to the tape. He tries not to the MP3s. He has a different problem. We're still trying to figure out how to approach it, how to get working around it. We know that he's got a lot to offer, but it's a struggle for us. One of the main things that his mom and I have found out that we get extremely frustrated not knowing how to work with him, how to overcome this. Now, the gentleman on the film, many of the things he said, here's a problem, here's how kids interpret it, this is what you can do to overcome that. But most of the things they didn't have solutions for. He just pointed out the problems. Being aware of it is good. I don't know if that would have helped me through the years. Maybe because I was aware of it, even if others weren't. I wasn't aware of the commonness of it. My problem is without going into any detail, but somewhere between perceiving things and them getting into the brain. It doesn't go in straight. It takes a while to get there. But it's been an interesting struggle. I'm, as I say, finally finding a few ways to get over parts of it. And as the teacher end, I'm seeing that with my son, different problems, which somewhat contradict mine, so we get frustrated with each other. As far as applying it to square dancing, some of the things we've been talking about here, I've been talking about for years, and there are ways to get around it. But you can't take everybody into mind. I did have one group where I thought anybody could learn to square dance, and I catered to the slower people in the group. And I lost the majority of the group. And it was a club, Tech Squares at MIT, where the majority belonged there and those others really didn't. There were other places where normal people could have learned. And it took me one class out of many, many to sacrifice, because the slow ones that I was trying to cater to eventually dropped out anyway, and so I ended up with the fast ones dropping out early and the slow ones dropping out late. I learned from that there are certain occasions that you've got to find a tactful way to let people know that this particular group wasn't for them. But they didn't have any difficulties other than the fact that they were normal. Anyway, thank you.
Hi, it's Julie again. I want to add something what Dottie said. Just for you to remember little statistics here. We all learn in college school that there are 4 learning types. And I think it's no news for you that I tell you over 90% of the people learn by doing it. Deborah told me the right word, but I don't remember. Kinesthetic, yeah. The next following group is the visualizers, but they're under 10%. Next ones are the auditive, and they're under 5%. And the readers who are just learning from readers are under 1%. Okay? But what it's also said is nearly nobody is only one type. We're mixtures. So what we can do in our square dance classes is saying, sure, it's easy. I'm explaining it over the mic, and it's wonderful for all who are listeners. And how many percent was that? 5. Around 5, a little bit under. So, what is the other 95%? They're going by doing, maybe a little bit by visual, maybe by reading. What we can do is say, we give all of them the apprehensive definitions and say, okay, next week I'm planning, if it goes like I want to, this and this call. If you want to, you can read. And next week I check if you do right what you read. It's still my responsibility as a teacher to check out if they read it right, but they have the chance. And of course you can ask, who of you read it? You will know after a couple of weeks who is the reader, because they are the ones who are raising their hands. The others will not read it because they know by experience I'm not a reading type. A lot we do, we take out a couple, or we do it with our partner and present that are for the auditive. And now it comes to let them dance. And I tell you something else. For learning a move correctly right, it takes us 7 repetitions at least. For correcting a one-time wrong doing, it takes us 13 times doing it right. Now imagine, somebody did it 7 times wrong. And that means 7 times 13, he has to do it right for correct the first mistake he did. That is nearly 100 times. Okay? So be aware that you're teaching, try to use all channels, and you have to watch. You have a big responsibility. Okay? Thanks.
Okay, Roy Gott again. And I got a few things. I'm very good at commenting on what other people, and this is in no particular order. But the we're talking about different learning styles and what you can do. And one thing that Betsy has done over the last few years for the people who don't, you were talking about getting the written material too late. She publishes when this age of websites and internet, on the 2 clubs she teaches for on their website, what is going to be taught is published on the website before the lesson. It goes up after. Well, she'll finish a Tuesday night lesson, and Wednesday will go up what's going to be taught the following Tuesday. So people who want to get a head start, read it, look it up, can do that. Those that don't want to, don't have to. The 3rd club she teaches for, she shares with another caller. That doesn't work so well. So what was taught is published immediately after the lesson. So there's always some place for them to get the reinforcement, something we would not have done years ago, and without the advantage of having websites that they can go to. That's one. 2, Dottie was talking about people, what they don't necessarily see what you have presented. Or it's the old, Mr. God, you never taught us that. No, what I taught and what you learned may not have been the same thing. But the reason I taught high school was so that I could coach baseball. To be honest, the mathematics was just secondary. And I remember my favorite part of teaching, coaching through the ranks was when I was junior varsity, and I was teaching the game as opposed to having to win at the varsity level and all that crap. And this is going to be tough, it won't be on the tape. I was showing them the correct way to field a ground ball. And I'll describe this. So I've got my glove, not between my feet, but over near my right foot. And there's reasons for that. I won't go into it. So then I was doing ground balls to my kids, and I realized, let's see if anybody picks up on this. Here they were. Okay, I'm left-handed. So I had my glove on my right hand by my right foot. All my right-handed junior varsity players had the glove on their left hand, putting it by their right foot. All they saw was glove, right foot. It was very hard not to chuckle. So, and this I've seen with some callers, and it drives me crazy. Teaching your class, student has a question. You're very happy to answer it. And you answer it. And you answer it. And you answer it. And you're giving this very lengthy answer to the question. Meanwhile, this person is starting to feel very, what's the word? Anxious, whatever, that, oh God, now everybody's staring at me while they're answering my question. I'm holding up the class. And you really need to make your answers as concise. And Clark was talking about that. Short sentences. And you just, I've had to correct my way. Someone asked me a question, I answer it as quickly as possible. And if it wasn't quite, I may pull them aside. I'll take a break sooner than I would have and go from there. And the last thing, and Sharon brought this up. We were talking about learning styles. Do you all know your own learning styles? I'm certainly kinesthetic. I was an athlete. I got to do stuff. But I have to, temper how I teach with, the way I would learn it, thinking, well, that may not be the way they learn it. And who was talking about correcting mistakes? One of our greatest square dance teachers, Jack Murtha. Some of you may be familiar. He had a quote. You're familiar with practice makes perfect? He said, no, it doesn't. Practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So if they learn it wrong the first time, the wrong becomes the permanent.
Same old bunch talking. Don Beck, Chilmark, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. What Roy just said that Jack Murtha said, and Clark was nodding his head because he knows I preach that. People, and I think Dottie was saying it true, people learn by doing. And I always tell people, do everything in your power to make sure they do it right the first time. Because because when they do it wrong the first time, they're going to learn it wrong. And they can also learn the right way eventually, but when the panic situation, they've got to choose now which one of those 2 methods I've learned is the one I need. So I have a little bit of concern with what Julie said, and I think Dottie, about giving the dancers a chance to read the definition beforehand. Because I don't know how they're going to interpret it. The dancer, as Clark knows well, the definitions are not written for a dancer to learn the call by. Especially not knowing what the standard formations of the call are. and they could very well interpret it incorrectly. So, again, I question whether that's a wise thing because they may learn it incorrectly, even though the basic idea is okay. Roy said something that I wanted to comment on, but I won't because I can't remember it. Yeah, sure.
Dottie again. So I didn't really say I want them to have it ahead of time. But what I do want them is to have it, in our case, since they're not going to have it reading it out there on the floor while we're having them walk through the dance, so that's not practical. But as a learner of square dancing, the minute I have had a chance to get away from the floor, and while I still remember what somebody has just taught me, my instinct is to write it down or check and see if what I see visually on whatever is written down matches up with my perception of what I've just learned. So it's not necessarily that you would give it to them before, but make sure that they have it available to them as soon afterwards as they want to have it.
One of the things Roy said that I remembered was keep your answers short because the person that asking the question might feel singled out. Along with that, I generally tell the people before, if you have a question, you're probably not the only one. So raise your hand and said, somebody in my square was wondering, seemed to have troubles with this. Can you tell us what it is? That takes the focus off of that person, and it's probably true. They're probably, if you didn't explain it clearly enough for one person or demonstrate it enough for one person, what have you, another person may be interested in the same answer anyway.
Go around behind you. Might be better. Hi, I'm Bill Tsukemen from Rancho Cucamonga, California, and I'm new to calling somewhat. I've been a couple years, but I haven't done a whole lot of teaching, but I do work with the handicapables. And some of the stuff that you guys have all been talking about and everything I kind of think is really amplified with the handicapables, because if you criticize them, they really take it to heart. They'll break down and start crying. They'll walk off the floor. And if you praise them, they gloat. They just pump right up. So I found that praising them has really been very effective. And repetition. You have to repeat things several times, and breaking the calls down, teaching a right and left through. You teach them to pass through, then teach them to do a courtesy turn, then teach them to do a pull by, and then teach them to do all those things together. So you really kind of segmented everything and break it all down. And since I haven't had a lot of practice in teaching and stuff like that, I found one of the things that really kind of helps is me to be more patient, I think, as I used to teach truck driving. And you want to see somebody who's anxious, get a young woman who's never drove in a stick shift before and put her in 40,000 pounds of truck and yell at her. So I learned to be real patient, to explain things slowly, to talk to them, to get them to stop and listen. Sometimes they keep trying to move forward when you've told them something and they're doing it wrong. So it is taking the time to tell them, well, wait a minute, stop right there. Now let's look at what you did or what we're going to do or how it is it ought to be done. And I found that to be real effective. And I also found in the thing that what I was that I didn't realize is I was the distracted learner. And I realized as I'm sitting here and watching somebody talk, and I see her writing, I see her foot bouncing, I saw Deborah swinging back and forth, playing with her pen. I saw this gentleman with his hand across his wife's, flipping his hand like this. While you're talking, I'm noticing all these things, and I get distracted. And some of what Dottie was saying, I'll hear a word, and I am gone for 2 or 3 minutes, and I come back, I have no idea what it is she's talked about. And I think I see that sometimes in the students. They'll get distracted by something, especially if they make a mistake. They start thinking about the mistake they've made. They no longer hear what you're saying. So that's what I've kind of noticed.
I had a couple of comments. This is Clark again. And I think the first one's one that if you don't do it, you can take it away. It'll give you something to take away and do. Especially when I'm teaching 7th graders square dancing, do a lot more demos than I normally would. So we're going to learn ladies chain. I want to demo the courtesy turn first. I want to demo how the ladies chain looks. It also gives me a chance to have them all sit down. We're in a place where they just sit down on the gym floor. I show something, they get up. And one of the points I make in demoing it is if you think of saying, let's say you're going to have a square demo, spin chain, and exchange the gears. And you're like, okay, blah, blah, we do this, we turn, this happens. It looks like this complicated amusement park ride. If you just watch the gestalt, the whole mess, all you've come away with is this is a really complicated mess. Whereas I always tell the people who I'm demoing, I say, pick the person who's doing your part and watch them and take the instruction I'm giving and see how it applies to them. And if you don't ask the people watching to do that, I don't think they get as much out of the demo, right? So that was one thing. At Tech Squares, we have the class and club meet on the same night, which is both good and bad. But if the class shows up early, and a bunch of them do, we have walkthroughs in a separate room. And the walkthroughs are without music and not by the club caller. And that reduces the pressure in two ways. The music isn't there, you're walking, you know the main point of this is to learn and catch up or see what you did. This is to review the calls from the previous week, not to teach anything new. And that lets people stop, ask questions. It lets the person doing it. It's often a caller, but sometimes it's a dancer or a wannabe caller who wants to just learn how to maneuver people around. And I think that helps. It lets people who missed a week learn stuff real quick, and the people who had questions go in, and everyone feels they're in it together. And that's a good feeling to engender in your class. We also have handouts, so they can read it if they want to, if they happen to be the 1% who learns that way. Crap, there's another thing I've forgotten.
Can I quickly answer? Yes.
Forgiven.
Julie again. Don, of course, if I give out the handouts ahead of time, I take up much more responsibility because it's now on me to check out, did they read what I wanted them to read? That means I have to be open to also imagine, and they come back and they do something what I didn't intend them to do, to be open and think, where could have taken the wrong turn? And I have to get my mind into them. If I think I'm not good in doing that, or I feel I don't want to take this responsibility, then don't do that. Because you as a teacher are responsible for what you give out and for the results. And you have to be aware of it. I want to share a funny story with you before I get all serious. I have a new club, and there's a dancer who's 70 years old, and he had really struggled with the call Zoom. So I told him, this is the shopping call. You're standing in line, you forgot something, you have to get out of the line and get it and get back into the line. His answer was, I don't go shopping. I thought, okay, that is really a problem. Sure enough, I only go up there once a month, but 2 months later, and we worked on that move, and I said, hey, it's the shopping move. Don't go shopping. 2 months later, he came before the club night and said, Julie, you wouldn't believe it. I was in the supermarket. And I forgot something. And I thought of you and I did a Zoom. He did that move right from that moment on. And that is so cool. So I told him, I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud that you know how to shopping now. Who do I give that to?
Barry McCombs, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I've had the advantage of teaching in other careers, nothing to do with education, but I've had to educate other professionals. I'm a retired family physician, and I was an early computer nerd, so I've taught physicians older than myself how to use laptops and handheld computers and now iPhones. And the one thing that I found with this, and also this year teaching square dancing regularly for the first time, I'm teaching people who are older than myself, and I'm collecting old age pension already. And learn from your dancers. I think I've learned that over the teaching that I've done, and I think several people have touched on that thing, but I thought it was just worth mentioning. You know, I've had the dancers feed me back, you know, information. I tend to be a talker, and after some things they said, they made me sure that from now on I demo as much as I possibly can. And over the weekend in the dance party things, I heard I'm going to go out and get myself a wireless microphone so I can do those demos better, just coming together. But what I think I've learned as much from those people as they have learned from me. And the one, just talking about stories, the one night I can be a little sarcastic. You know, if something goes wrong, I can be a little sarcastic with just off the top of my head. And I just about lost it that night, and my 96-year-old, soon to be 97 next week, came up to me and said, "Oh, you are so patient." And it was the night I just about lost it. Thank you.
Amazing how many things you can blame on the moon.
One of the things that I've gotten addicted to is finding cute things that are sage sayings on the internet to share with my wife and then delete. And a few of them I keep because I keep trying to read them and remind myself of them, and I want to share a couple of those. One, I was thinking is Dottie's taking notes so that she can make her comments on things, and Roy's taking notes, and I'm taking notes on what Roy's saying. This one says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Think about that. And a wiser person than I said this. They give Albert Einstein credit for it. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Those, I think, are relatively pertinent to our conversation.
Carol Cormier, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Barry taught 2 classes of 40 grade 1 students last week, and it was a really enlightening experience because I took the place of a couple. There was one square of kids that were minus a whole couple. So on the one side I had a little boy who looked like he had a learning disability, and on the other side was a little girl, and I was both their corners. The little boy said 3 times, "I just did something hard." And I was so impressed. He was so confident about, obviously for him, perceiving, that he did something difficult. And the little girl had told me on the QT prior to that he needed help. So I thought their level of awareness is so different than what it used to be, and I thought it would be good to share that with you.
This is Dottie again. In the picture when they were talking about the teacher saying, "I can't do this because it would be unfair to the rest," and how do we compensate? That is very apropos to the issue. Students become aware very quickly of somebody in the group that needs help, and they will make sure the teacher helps. Even teaching, I've had hearing disabilities where I have to wear a microphone so they get like our hearing assist, and I occasionally would forget to put the thing on because I'm concentrating on what I have to teach, and the students would make sure you need to put that on because so-and-so in the back, they're very aware. And I have among my group a dancer who had polio, so she's actually paralyzed on one side, but she nevertheless manages to square dance very well, and very determined lady. But for the whole club, there's that sense of, what she can do is wonderful, and we're going to support her in every way we can.
No. I was asking for Gary and Gabriel. You have anything to add to this? Okay, great. Well, that's great. Well, it's been a great roundtable session. Thank you all for your input on this thing. Mic's on. Thank you all for being here for this discussion, and thank you all for watching the video too. If you think it was valuable, well, first of all, make sure you fill out your critique sheets for the convention by the end of the convention, and let us know what you think of the video session and this follow-up session afterwards. If you think it's valuable to repeat, there's about 20 people watching the video today, and there are about 300 people at the convention, which means 280 did not see the video. It's my hope that we would have a big room some year and 100 people be watching this video, and we can get everybody to see it at one time. But if you think it was valuable, make sure you put that in your critique sheet. If you don't think it was valuable, put that on there as well. I guess that's it. Do you want to add any closing comments?
One other thing I wanted to say.
Okay.
So in preparing for this piece, I did a little bit of searching. He used a phrase that I hadn't heard of, the far point something problem. It was a type of disability. And in looking at that, I found a website, which I'll put on the tape, and you'll be able to get it from there. You can come up and write it down afterwards. And I wrote a note to myself. It says, check out the TOLD, which stands for Try On Learning Disabilities workshop, which comes with a checklist and a strategy guide. And I haven't done a lot of research on this, but it had, for a bunch of different types of learning disabilities, a long list of these are things you may notice or see, and then a whole page of these are things you can do to help or ameliorate the problem. And I think there were some in there that would be apropos of us, so teaching and calling square dancing. So that's at TOLD Workshop, TOLDWORKSHOP.wordpress.com.
All right. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the convention.